this conversation that Ian is going to kick off for us. This isn't a one-way conversation. The beautiful thing with Ian talking this through is that he's got deep experience, personal experience, not just in Australia, but all around the world, with having to actually deal with the issues of carbon credits, carbon sequestration, and all the things that go around that. So what we really wanted to do today was actually, have Ian really lead that conversation, share what they've been doing and why, this is an important topic, and really open it up to the floor to just get into the details. This is a topic that actually can go very deep and very wide, and we want to be able to give the space for everyone to do that. So Ian is an incredible individual. So I've known Ian now for a couple of years, and we met here actually very early on when it just started with the Symphony 7 journey, and we kicked off the 2030 Hub, which was initially the Sustainability Hub. And Ian is the co-founder and chair of Carbon Asset Solutions. And this is, something that's been in the making for many years. It's a technology that's come from, I think it was a university in the US that initially developed it. They own the license for that technology. They have the, in fact, I'm not sure, you may have even bought the patent. I'll let Ian speak to the details about that. But why this is, a very, near and dear topic to Ian is because they have got the technology to measure the carbon in the soil. And that measurement of carbon in soil, if done correctly, and, for the world, from the processing in the agriculture, if we're able to measure and improve the quality of our soil, the sequestration of the soil, there are so many benefits, and the amount of carbon that our soil can sequester is quite large. So it's a very important topic. Ian has had years and years of experience in this space. And what we will do is just hand over to Ian, maybe do a bit of an introduction of yourself, Ian, and the technology and the work you're doing, and maybe kick off this process. Sound like a good plan?
Sounds like a plan. Thanks very much, Vlad. And hello, everybody. Welcome and thanks for coming. As Vlad said, my name is Ian Jones. I'm chair and co-founder of Carbon Asset Solutions. I've been involved in early stage technology and business startups for a little bit over 3 decades now. Done quite a number of startups, 14 in all up. Some we've taken to IPOs, some we've sold. Others we've sold the IP, and a few we've had to close down very quickly before they blew us to bits. The usual story you get in startup world. So it's been an interesting journey. We started Carbon Asset Solutions around about 3.5 years ago, really to focus on one of the major problems we saw in the marketplace, which was there was a lack of technologies to remove carbon from the atmosphere at significant scale, certify it with the precision required to deliver a carbon credit that met the governance standards of the financial markets, and create that sort of capital pathway link between corporations and sustainable agriculture. So that's what we've done. But I actually did not want to talk about Carbon Asset Solutions at all today. I wanted to talk about something sort of different and in fact much broader, which is the new world economy, which is starting to emerge and take place. And the reason why I wanted to talk about that is that impacts upon everybody, no matter who they are. And this new world economy, it's not something that's coming, it's something that's happening now. And we all need to be prepared for it because it's really, really different to anything else that we're familiar with. So over the next kind of 10 or 12 minutes, I'll give you a bit of an inside view as to what to expect, and then how you can position yourself ahead of the game. And I'll give you some examples of the kind of opportunities that potentially can relate to the businesses that you are all in, and how you can benefit from those. So looking at it at a high level, there are really 2 sweeping changes which are driving this new global economy. One which Vlad just referred to, which is carbon is fast becoming the new global currency. And secondly, sustainability is the new reporting framework. And that's really important because every transaction, every one, will be judged not just on its financial value, but on its climate value. So as a business owner, every action you take will determine how much your business prospers or does not prosper in this sort of new world economy that's emerging. It's not something we need to fear or worry about or anything like that, because it opens up amazing new opportunities if you know how. So let's start by setting the scene sort of very briefly. Obviously, an economy needs rules, and a sustainable economy is no different. So what are the rules and who's setting them? Well, there's a whole world of international bodies that over the past year or so have been busily setting up the new system, which is about to change our lives. Most of them, none of us have ever really heard of. There's the International Financial Reporting Standards, or the IFRS. Now, that's the global accounting framework under most countries, including Australia, operate. And we've operated under those since 2005. It's because of the IFRS that you can pick up a set of financial accounts in Australia or India or Canada or Singapore or Europe or pretty much anywhere. And they all look the same and you can understand them. So that was fine. But at the end of last year, the IFRS set up the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board, or the SASB. And this has developed a whole new set of rules for quantifying and reporting ESG impacts and risks into a financial and corporate statements. Now, they're often referred to as the SASB or SASB rules. And trust me, you're going to become really, really familiar with that term over the next several years. Now, separately, there's also another mob, which is called the Task Force on Climate-Related Disclosures, TCFD. And that's a brand new body, and that addresses how climate change might impact upon an organisation's ability to create value. And there's a heap of other bodies out there setting up all sorts of rules, none of which we need to learn. We just need to be aware that this is happening. And we can't ignore all this for several reasons. Firstly, as I mentioned, the IFRS is the financial reporting mechanism that governs everything we do in Australia and pretty much everywhere else. And the new sustainability SASB reporting system is going to be hardwired into our country's financial and regulatory framework very soon. It's already well down that track in Australia and all other countries such as UK, US, Canada, New Zealand, and so on. So what's that mean? Well, basically it means that financial statements in future will need to factor in climate risk as a potential impact on a company's performance. And that means accountants, auditors, boards, and executives are going to have to review and take that into account in their reporting. Now, that is a really, really big change, and it's going to take a lot of getting used to, because looking forward in 5 to 10 years, when you pick up a set of documents or financial accounts of a company, you're going to look just as closely at the climate disclosure section as you do on the balance sheet today. It's going to be second nature to you. And at the moment, nobody's doing that. And the second reason we can't ignore these sort of new standards that are coming into place are what's known as Scope 1, 2, and 3 reporting rules. Now, most of us have heard of Scope 1, 2, and 3, although hardly anybody really knows what they mean. It's actually pretty straightforward, but their impact is really quite profound. So let me explain that. So every business, everyone, no matter how big or small you are, is going to have to operate and report under Scopes 1, 2, or 3, which means what? Obviously. So Scope 1 emissions are those that you create and control directly. Things such as your travel, driving to a meeting, catching a flight, the energy you use to make your product, and so on. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Scope 2 emissions are those from the energy that you buy in, your electricity, gas, and so on. So someone else is emitting it, but you are consuming it. So obviously the point of Scope 1 and 2 is Scope 1 to reduce your own emissions. Scope 2 is to transition to lower emissions sources, green energy, for example, and account for that. Okay, so that's pretty easy stuff, and that's not so bad. But now we come to scope 3, and that's where it starts to get tricky. Scope 3 emissions are all those in your up and downstream supply chain. In other words, everything you buy in to make a product or service, and everything downstream when you deliver your product or service, including, if it's a product, the cost of it being disposed of. Now, that's pretty far-reaching. When most people hear about scope 3, the reaction is usually like, whoa, how is that going to work? Well, that is the $64 trillion question that is perplexing the big end of town right now. So, but it's right on our doorstep. So from next year, public reporting companies in many countries, starting certainly in the US and others, are progressively going to need to report their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions in their annual reports and audit statements. And within a few years, it's going to flow through the whole system, everywhere across the globe. Okay, so most people, when we get to that stage, say, yeah, that's for big companies. That's not for me. Nah, it is exactly for you. See, you are part of someone else's scope 3. So if you're providing a product or service to, say, Westpac or Myer or the government or any large corporation anywhere in the world, you can expect a letter someday in the not too distant future saying, what are you doing about your scope 1 and 2 and 3 emissions? So Microsoft, for example, is already started writing to their suppliers, both big and small, saying, if you want to remain in our supply chain, you had better do something about it, and you had better report on it correctly under the new standards. The good news is that the action that you need to take is on your scopes 1 and 2, the simple bit, because your scope 1 and 2 are part of somebody else's scope 3 and vice versa. So that's how all that kind of works. So that's enough of the theory and sort of what's happening out there. And there are plenty of excellent reports out there. If you want to dig into it a bit deeper, have a look, Google something like ESG or SASB, KPMG, EY, McKinsey, and all these other sort of advisory groups publish some really good stuff. So I urge you to do just a little bit of reading on it, just so you've got some background and at least the jargon. So let's move on and look at how we capitalize on this. Just being aware and understanding what is going on is a big plus, because hardly anyone out there does. You don't have to be an expert. You just need to know enough that you are more of an expert than your competitors or customers. And given that every business, everywhere over time, is going to have to address their scope 1 and 2 emissions and transition to SASB accounting standards, the most obvious opportunity, especially if you're a consultant or advisor, is let's help them prepare for it. So a good friend of mine, Tim, has an incredibly successful practice putting efficiency systems in place for SMEs, largely a turnover between kind of $1 and $20 million per annum. By efficiency systems, I mean better marketing strategies, sales strategies, management data controls and stuff like that. Now, about a month ago, Tim had never heard of sustainability compliance shift or SASB or any of that stuff until we caught up for a cup of tea and just started to shoot the breeze. But he saw immediately it was a golden opportunity for him to be ahead of the curve. So he's now working with me to add sustainability to his sustainability compliance to his offering to his clients. But he's mainly doing this through targeting accountants as the channel to reach masses of business clients. Now, accountants, and blessings to all of those in the group that are accountants at the SME levels, are by and large in the dark on this sustainability stuff. So here is his opening. So that's a really good opportunity if you're an advisor and consultant. But what if you're not an advisor and consultant? What if you're into something else like, say, sales and brand marketing? Well, remember what I said at the beginning. Every transaction will be judged on both its financial and climate impact. So if a consumer brand can show its ESG impact and that it is moving towards net zero carbon, then there is a positive brand message to consumers, especially younger ones that are looking for this kind of edge. So that can really differentiate you in the market. So there's an opportunity there. So what about if you're in some other line of business, like, for example, finance or insurance? Now, the impact of sustainability and climate on lenders and risk managers is really huge. So pretty soon, interest rates and risk premiums will be graded according to a client's climate risk and action. Now, we're working with Carbon Asset Solutions. We're working with one of the world's larger insurance companies as they're trying to figure out how to incorporate ESG risk compliance into their systems. Now, they haven't got much of a clue at this point in time, but we're sort of shoveling around ideas as to how this could work. So we're working through this process leading forward. So that can trickle down. And if you're a lender or an insurance broker, perhaps you can start to work with consultants to get your clients ready for the new systems and use that to get better rates for clients and badge your clients up as lower risk prospects for both lenders and for insurers. So when you start to think about the whole dynamics of this new and emerging system, there are a multitude of possibilities to cooperate and create new value propositions and things like that. But you've got to be broad-minded and start to think right outside the box, because nothing like this has existed before. The other obvious one is for directors and corporate executives, because there's a whole new world of compliance, reporting obligations, and all sorts of things about to drop squarely in your lap with big penalties if you don't do it. Auditors are the same thing. They have to sign off on the veracity of the risk management and the other statements. So big changes coming in. So it's really time, if you're a director or an executive, to start thinking about what the impact will be on your company and how you can use that, again, potentially to create a marketing edge in this new economy going forward. So just to summarize, there's obviously a whole lot of stuff going on out there at the high level, but it's trickling down and going to impact on all of us very, very soon, from next year. So all these high-level groups, the IFRS, the TCFD, in a few months, COP27, they're expected to clarify Article 6, which is the carbon reporting framework, Article 13, which is the carbon framework, Article 13, which is the reporting framework, comes in from next year. So all this stuff is crystallizing into a new interconnected compliance mechanism, which goes all the way down to the smallest company all over the world. And transparency and accountability are what sort of binds it all together with these new systems. So everyone can see what everyone else is doing or not doing. And business and capital is going to shift towards those that are doing, and especially towards those that are doing it really well. So like every massive change, some are going to see it as a threat, some are going to deny it's existing. Others will say that it's not going to affect me. But the really smart operators are going right now, they're going, the landscape is shifting. It's still got a way to go, but the shift is profound. So how do I position myself best in this new emerging economy? Now, there's no single answer, as the system is still very formative, still evolving. But that is what makes it so interesting and so exciting for us as the opportunities to go forward and move ahead. So thank you very much.
No, Ian, that's perfect. And before we get into questions, can I ask you to just provide your take on something that's also really important and that you get to see quite clearly, which is that the idea that companies, especially when they're offsetting their emissions, buying the credits, companies are generating a range of different credits. Your business is involved in the measurement of soil sequestration of carbon.
Yep.
But the the generation of those credits. Can you just give the group a bit of a sense of what is happening around the world in that area as well, around, where, from what we've seen and the conversations we've had, if you're generating credits here in Australia, well, internationally you can't sell them. There's no transition of those. There's no kind of transparency of those markets. They're not aligned. Everything seems to be quite disparate. Are you able to just give us a bit of a comment on that? Because I think that would round out this conversation around the emissions and the trading and the offsetting and so forth.
Yeah, sure. So the voluntary carbon markets, there's two big carbon markets on the planet. There's the emissions trading scheme, which the government regulated markets by and large, and they're for the big emitters like the power stations and all those kind of guys. That operates under a certain set of legislation, and they're worth hundreds of billions of dollars a year. On the other side, there's the voluntary carbon markets. And up till recently, they've been tiny. Up until about 3 or 4 years ago, they're only about $100 million a year compared to 100 billion on the ETSs. And supply was very fragmented and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of the carbon credits on those markets were, to put it mildly, dodgy. So as everybody's thoughts started to shift towards not just emissions reduction, but atmospheric carbon removal, which in itself generates carbon credits, there were a whole bunch of initiatives set up to create this, better governance standard. As I say, it's all about transparency and governance. And there were task force set up by Mark Carney, former governor of the Reserve Bank, and all sorts of things, about 18 months, almost 2 years ago. And they set up a series of recommendations, which have since been picked up by other bodies. There's so many bodies and acronyms out there, it's unbelievable in this space. So this set of frameworks is starting to be set up, which puts in place this governance and transparency. And then there are software architectures such as the Microsoft Cloud for Sustainability, which is coming into play towards the end of this year, early next year. And we've been working very closely with Microsoft on some of the development design aspects of that. And that will become a transaction platform. So what will happen is that supply chains will operate under the new framework, will plug into these global platforms, which will allow people to see, are these reliable credits or are these not reliable credits? So again, it's like the stuff I was mentioning with the IFRS and all the other bits and pieces. That's an emerging framework. The same thing's happening with carbon credit transactions. So there's a consistency being put in place, which will mean that supply chains of carbon credits, which are based on a lack of integrity, or all these old carbon credits that are kind of sitting around that nobody's bought so far because there's no governance, they'll just wither and die, and you'll find there'll be no marketplace for them because they won't sit within the consistency framework that's emerging. So it's a transitional process. I know, Vlad, that's kind of a higher answer probably than you wanted, but that's exactly what's happening. So alongside with that, emerging precision high integrity carbon credit supply chains, what they call MRVs. MRVs just means measurement, recording and verification. In other words, how do you measure the carbon, how do you record it with the right degree of governance, and how do you certify it? Nobody had heard of MRVs 2 years ago, including us. Now we're one of the most, we are probably the most advanced high integrity digital MRV on the planet. That's Microsoft telling us that, not us. But there's a lot of them emerging in different things. So you're going to have high precision MRVs around specific things. We only deal in soil because our technology measures the carbon in the soil. But there'll be precision MRVs around trees, around direct air capture, around seaweed, about blue ocean, around all these other things, because the imperative is there's way too much CO2 up there. We've got to get it out. We've got to get it down there, and we've got to make sure it sticks down there. And so all these integrity supply chains will start to emerge, and as long as they conform with the transparency standards, the global transparency standards, then all will be fine. And the ones that don't and try and circumvent the system, they'll just be swept aside and will disappear into the marketplace. So I hope that answers kind of what you're wanting, Vlad.
It's brilliant, and I've got I always have a lot of questions. I find this space to be absolutely amazing. Maybe I will ask one question because I think it's just relevant, and then we'll open it up to the floor. I hope everyone doesn't mind that I'm throwing in the first couple of questions, but I think it's an important one. When we're talking about, especially you mentioned Microsoft and that transaction platform, it seems that space, there's a rush of companies going, we've got a platform, trade your credits here. You can be in the US, you can be in Europe, you can be in Australia, wherever the credits are generated, you can transact them. And I know a number of organizations are looking at things like NFTs and the like.
Yep.
The question though is, because you raised it, the quality of those credits. Where is the guarantee of the quality of how does anyone know that what they're buying is actually a quality credit? Or is it only going to be the MRVs that are going to really provide those? I mean, how do you know?
Okay, there's a couple of layers to your question there. First, on transaction platforms, there's a lot of transaction platforms which are exchanges. So you've got, in the carbon credit pathway, you've got the supply chain creation, then you've got the registry, which is where you can see them. So that's like going to a library and getting a book. If you can imagine a book sitting on a shelf in a library, it was created by an author. So somebody wrote it and somebody published it. That's your MRV, your supply chain. Then it sits on a shelf in a library, and that's your registry, and you find it, and you borrow it or buy it or do whatever you want to do. And so there's a lot of these transaction exchanges up there. And then you've got sort of the data, they're almost like the search engine. So think of the Microsoft Cloud for Sustainability more like a big database of search engines. So corporations anywhere, Microsoft doesn't necessarily want it to be a transaction platform. What they want it to do is to be a transparent platform where anybody can say, I am looking for a carbon credit that has these kind of characteristics, has got these ESG, SDG parameters associated with it, is from this location, it does this, whatever characteristics are in there, got this permanence, it's got this, etc., etc. All these parameters we've had to build into the system, and they're searchable on that basis. And then, then the next question is, where do I buy it? I can buy it over there, I can buy it over there. So you've got these layers of transaction platforms up there. Now, to create the quality and the standard, you operate under a certification methodology. In Australia, the one people are familiar with are the ERF ACCU market, the Emissions Reduction Fund, which creates the ACCUs. And there's a lot of really good ACCUs out there, and there's a lot of really not so good ACCUs out there, as recent press in the early part of the year was pointing out. So that's the ERF is one supply chain. You've got others out there such as Vera, the most widely known of Vera, which is an American system, Gold Standard, which is a European system, and there are a set of methodologies that govern these things. There's another set that are emerging, which is under the ISO standards. Now, nearly everybody's heard of the ISO standards, ISO 9000 and 9001, and there's a heap of them. They really govern, the consistency of how things are done globally. And the ISO framework has about 164 countries signed up to it globally. And the ISO sets all sorts of standards. And one of the standards it sets is in for what they call GHG projects, which is greenhouse gas emission projects. So that's for how does somebody manage a greenhouse gas project, either to reduce emissions or to pull the stuff out of the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. How is it independently certified? The whole management process. These other registries, such as Vera and Gold Standard, are kind of interpretations of the ISO standard. They are the base framework, a little bit like the IFRS is the global accounting standards, and Australia does it pretty much the same, but might be a bit differently. America does it differently because they use the GAAP standards, for example. So there's adaptations. In our case, we decided that we would build our own new standard under the ISO framework because we didn't sit in the adaptations. They were too analog. We're a more digital, fast track thing. So as long as it conforms to one of the standards, whether it's Vera, whether it's ERF, whether it's ISO, whether it's CBD, whatever it is, and the quality is independently audited. So all these things, the project manager or however it is has to go through a process, and then at points, independent auditors such as your KPMGs, your EY, Bureau Veritas, zillion of them out there, come in and go, yeah, that's been done correctly, bang, stamp. So that's how it works. So that's it's supply chains, consistency, independent verification, all that kind of stuff comes together. It's under the the existing standards, Vera, Gold Standard, all that kind of stuff. The process is really, really long and involved and expensive. Typically, if you're doing a project under, say, a Vera or Gold Standard, it might take you 2 to 3 months to get a certification. Might take you many, many tens of thousands of dollars to get it done, because there's all these layers of consultants, because there's all this estimation modeling. Whereas what we've done differently is when we wanted to create a fully integrated digital pathway, not only for managing the data flowing on through the project, but managing the audit project as well. So we built all these sort of integrated software audit programs. It's been a 2-year labor of bashing your head on a brick wall, I tell you. And so we've got all this stuff being integrated, all these major software systems, and we're just rolling out commercially in Canada, the US at the moment, just gradually. We're testing the integration of all these particular systems to make sure they work. But what we wanted to do was to reduce the audit time frame from months and tens of thousands of dollars to days and a few $1,000s, because our audit logs, because they're digital, are all captured in the system all the way through. So if somebody's interested in buying carbon credits from a project, even though the credits might not be ready yet, they can go through and go, oh yeah, that's been done like that, and it meets all the characteristics. So again, there'll be a lot of these digitized, efficient MRVs emerging over the next several years, and looking 5 to 10 years from now, they will be the standard. Even Vera and Gold Standard are starting to explore, how do we shift to digital MRVs? They're struggling, but we've already developed one, and we're out there with it, albeit it's still I've got its little trainer wheels on and is paddling around it,
and we can see
speed, but we're getting there.
And thanks, Ian. And we can see that the MRVs, I think that's where I kind of wanted this conversation to sort of get to as a point before we open up to the floor, which is now. So just have your questions ready and just pop up your hand. If you can use the little hand icon on your thing, that's probably the easiest, because then everybody gets a chance to have a voice. But we'll open it up in just a sec. But that's right, like this journey of finding that standards, finding the large organizations, this massive cost of consultants and everything, everybody just loading up. The MRV model is actually the piece that is natural fit for certifying as well as measuring and certifying, because you have the history. So I really like where you went with that, Ian. I actually do believe that quite strongly as well, that is a future where a lot of the overhead will hopefully start to reduce, as opposed to having so much overhead that there is now. I'd like to open up the floor to questions. So either lift up your hand or put your digital hand up, and I will pass to you. Questions or comments. It doesn't have to be a question for Ian. There was a lot of information there. I've got Julie. You're there. There you are. Yes. Unmute and pick it up.
Look, thank you so much, Ian. I remember talking to you probably about a year ago, and you were knee deep in this standard setting process, which sounded like a nightmare. It's good that you've got this far. But I'm still a bit confused about, like, I work with Greening Australia, and they operate with ACCUs, obviously. And so what's the relationship then with ACCUs and this sort of digital standard setting process, or is just one go into the other?
No, ACCUs operates under its own system and standard. So a project operator in Australia can choose to operate under the ACCU ERF market, or they can choose to operate under any standard, any other standard. They're not obliged to operate under ACCUs. It's just people have always assumed in Australia, it's a government standard, therefore it has to be the best, therefore I have to operate under it. No, you don't. It's actually, when you look at it in detail, it's not very good, unfortunately. It's not very good in terms of it's very onerous on the project owners, and slow and cumbersome, and the sales process, as you know, through the auction system and all that kind of stuff is cumbersome. And it's also subject to government manipulation, hopefully less so in the years ahead, but in the past it certainly was. But any project owner, whether it's Greening or whether it's anybody else in Australia, doesn't have to operate under ACCUs. They could choose to operate under a Vera project or a gold standard project, or under ours if they're doing soil carbon. So you're not obliged to do it. So the only way the ACCU ERF market would transition to a digital framework is as if they completely reinvented themselves, which is most unlikely. The ERF has just gone through a public consultation as what should we do to look forward. I think the consultation process finished around about this time last year from memory. We looked at it and we put in some comments because we didn't think much of their future vision, let alone their hindsight vision, because it was very prescriptive. And the problem with a lot of these old standards is they seem to write rules and regulations to make it more difficult for people to come in rather than make it easier for people to come. When you look at these crazy rules about, additionality and stuff like that. I'll just give you one small example of how dumb some of these rules are, not necessarily under ACCU, but under some of the other ones. So if a farmer, and again, I'm just getting back to soil, if a farmer is wanting to transition to a sustainable farming and become a carbon farmer and remove carbon from the atmosphere and all sorts of things like that, they have to do something what they call additional, which is fair enough. What am I going to do differently to what I've been doing before that's going to make the change and pull it down there? And that can be things like no-till or cover crops or reduce chemical fertilizer, all this kind of stuff. That's fine. But a lot of the standards, a lot of them say if 20% or more of the region is doing that already, you don't qualify. So it's like, huh? You mean if 20% of the people are already doing something of benefit and I decide to do something of benefit, I'm automatically excluded? Duh. So
which standard is that under?
It's
that's amazing.
It's under various ones of Vera and Gold Standard and some of the other ones.
Geez, how frustrating is that?
Yeah, it's really dopey. And they're full of, they are literally full of this kind of stuff. And so what we've had to do in getting our ISO certification, which we haven't had fully signed off yet, because we have to deal with auditors that look at our methodology, and they look at it through the lens of 20 years of doing this kind of what we think is rather prescriptive, dumb stuff. And we come along and we say, well, we're going to do it like this. And it's like, no, nobody's ever done it like that before. And it's like, yeah, but we meet the same outcome. We just don't do it through the same process. Way too hard for their little brains. So we have what could only be described as robust discussions with some of the auditors. Do they generate into shouting? Sometimes they do. That is really satisfying. So yeah, so it's a process. So we're going through a mindset process of why don't you make it inclusive? Why do you want to make it exclusive? Gold standard is another one where as soon as if somebody comes into a project, they have to demonstrate that the only reason they go into a project is because the additional revenue will make it viable for them. And as soon as the project becomes financially viable, automatically they're ejected out of the thing. It's like, really?
Well,
So
actually, so Ian, this is probably great. I was just going this kind of some of the the limitations. It's nice to have something specific. And I know Rolls, who I think you're in New Zealand at the moment, Rolls has got a particular client that is probably a really good example for us to have a bit of a discussion. And let me just check the time. We're really good on time. Rolls, just unmute yourself and jump on in.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
there you are.
Yeah, I'm on the PC so that if somebody presents, but I'm also on the phone because that doesn't die. I'm not thinking of a particular client at the moment, but let's say I have a client who separates out FOGO or wants to separate out FOGO from the general waste.
Could you just sort of just clarify FOGO for those?
Oh, sorry, food and organic waste or greens or anything that's food traceable. If they want to process that on site and then apply it to their land, whether that's the greens that they have or a bowling greens or a rugby or sport club, what is well, obviously that's got a carbon positive. Well, my question is, what is the time, effort and financial resource required to measure the carbon footprint and monetize that? So obviously at the moment, nothing's happening with it. They're doing good work, but nobody's measuring it because it's too difficult, it's too expensive. Maybe you've got some advice for me there.
Yeah, without knowing the specifics of it, in generally speaking, what we do, but sorry, just to jump back, yes, measuring carbon in a soil is expensive, slow and inaccurate, and that's been the problem. And that's why soil carbon didn't really make any contribution towards carbon sequestration for over 2 decades. And that was the specific problem we set out to solve. Why hasn't anybody solved that? And it was a technology we found developed by the US Department of Agriculture and Auburn University in Alabama, sitting in there for 7 years, ignored by the world. And we found it by reading a publication. And that measures the carbon in the soil instantly, very precisely, 10,000 times more precise than anything else, fraction of the costs, and generates the result immediately in a data stream which we capture in the cloud. So there is a way to measure it really, really efficiently at this point in time, which is this thing that we have. So that can be done. It's just a matter of whoever is doing what they're doing needs to look at, for something like that, they would apply to operate under our methodology, because we don't just go out and measure. We get asked all the time, can I make one of these measurement vehicles and or can you bring one out there and all that? No, you have to operate under the entire MRV. It's MRV, it's not M. Because without the R and the V, the M doesn't make any difference whatsoever. It'll tell you what's in there, but big deal. You need to go through the measurement process to create a carbon credit. So there is hope with that kind of thing. It just depends on the project size and all that. But typically we would go and we would measure day one. That's what we call a baseline measure. Then there would be the practice change that your clients would do, which is whatever they're doing. And then we go back in 2 years on average, and we would remeasure whatever is the increase, less the GHG emissions from running the project, get certified, there's your carbon credit. And it's not any more complex than that.
Can I just comment as well, Rolls, and I'm sure you probably found this, we've noticed that there are a number of organizations that come up and they're usually consulting organizations that will say, look, whatever project you have, we'll come in, we'll do your carbon credits or your credits, we'll do the assessment and so forth, but we'll take 30% of anything that you earn from that. So largely, so no upfront fees. And then there's others that go, look, we'll have an upfront fee, but then, you know, they don't take anything ongoing. Just would love, if anyone's dealing with those sort of organizations, I wouldn't mind hearing thoughts about that. Is that something that you've seen, Ian, as well, and or roles in New Zealand? I'd love to hear something around that.
Yeah, Rolls, you go ahead.
So, you know, typically we'll approach a client and we'll approach it from the economic perspective. So what are you buying now? Can we get it better? Can we get better service, more reliable? But what I like to do is I also like to explore the social and the environmental benefits. I think, you know, it's one thing to, you know, to put some equipment in and to process that FOGO. It's another thing to be able to say, hey, here's a certified result from an environmental perspective. And by the way, you've also earned some carbon credits. Who would you like to give them to? So the model we work with is that your first example where we take a share of the savings at the back end rather than upfront costs. Does that answer your question, Vlad?
It does, and I was just wondering, like, you know, just those companies that do the specific credits as well, like, is it worthwhile or going down the path of bringing on, separate to the work that you guys do, Rolls, I suppose, but those who are specifically focusing on carbon credits or credit, you know, and certifying it and doing all that work, that take a large chunk of the money that you'll receive ongoing forever. So, you know, I've seen like 30% and so forth. Is that something that, is it worthwhile, or should organizations, if the project is big enough, just take the hit and do the assessment, pay up front, instead of giving away, you know, a lifetime's worth of 30%?
Well, I've got a client who, it's a large university, who have already done 2 very expensive studies over the last 13 years, 17 years, and it hasn't generated any benefits. You know, it sounds to me like here's a much simpler methodologies on the horizon. And so maybe, you know, for a third spend, they can actually get some results 2 years down the road. You know, I have other clients who are just too small. They can't afford the, you know, the audit fees to join the carbon emissions, the trading scheme. They're just too small to do it. So, you know, we're missing the smaller clients. There's a lot of good happening there, but we're missing out on measuring it and making it quantifiable and making it seen.
It seems like what you were saying, Ian, was that this is really, at the moment, designed for the larger scale, really, for the larger organizations. And I think Julie was saying similar.
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, there's going to be a trickle-down effect. Rolls made a really interesting point in terms of, you know, social and governance impact. One of the things that we were cognizant of right at the beginning as we were putting this thing together, because we wanted to create a carbon credit, but we realized that sustainable farming has significant SDG co-benefits, as they call it. And we sort of saw that intuitively right at the beginning. We thought, oh, they might be valuable one day, so let's quantify those and build those into our systems without having any idea how we were going to monetize them in future, other than sounded good. And because sustainable farming has direct positive impacts on 9 of the 17 SDGs. So we built that in, and we've since been starting to work more closely because of the rise of all these sustainable accounting standards and all this other stuff that's coming into play. Suddenly quantifying ESG has become a big thing, and the standards are emerging around the quantification. I mean, there's been a lot of bad press of late about, you know, ESG investing, and it's all sort of smoke and mirrors and all that.
Greenwashing, kind of, right? I think is the term.
Yeah. And up to now, yeah, that's been the case, but that doesn't mean to say it's not. It's not a good thing in the future. In fact, it's the thing of the future. You've just got to have the governance standards, and that's what's emerging. And so we started working about 4 or 5 months ago on how do we quantify the SDG/ESG characteristics. SDGs are about what the real life impact is. ESG is how is that reported in the compliance framework. So there's sort of like a translation translation process that goes on. And we're working with a Singapore-based software company that does that translation. So they'll take our SDG sort of data that we onboard at the beginning with the project owner or the farmer, and then they'll mishmash it into the required reporting standards. And so we attach ESG, what we call, we staple ESG compliant data, independently verified data, to a carbon credit. So that means for a corporation who is wanting to buy a carbon credit because they've got net zero obligations, we also deliver attached a nice little balloon, candles, and a ribbon with a whole bunch of ESG independently verified data, which they can search, because if their ESG compliance data needs to meet, these reporting standards, because that's what their stakeholders want, then they can get those ones. They can get, so all that's built into the system. And we started to road test this at various meetings. Only quite recently, I had to speak at a ESG World Summit in Singapore in July, where we won the award for Best SDG 13 Climate Action Company, by the way. So I spoke to this World Summit thing, and I said, we are doing this, and we're badging we're stapling the ESG data to that to assist future corporate reporting mechanisms. Well, that caused a stampede, didn't it? So we're now starting to push that into different markets, and we're talking to large corporations, but also it's got the attention of large agribusiness operators in Canada and the United States, who operate more like corporations than farmers. I mean, some of these groups are amazing. They've got like $17 billion worth of rural assets under management, and they have to operate as a corporation, and so they want this kind of stuff. And it's good for them as well, because I mentioned when I was talking about lenders and insurers have to reprice their money and their risk depending upon what the ESG climate performance of their clients is. So these big rural operators know they can go back to their lenders and they can go back to the insurers and say, we are doing this on that climate footprint. Here's independent ESG verified data. So we want a better coupon rate on our bond. We want a better insurance rate on that. And that's what we're working also with that insurance company with. So everybody's trying to figure out, how do we package this and how do we work all that? All we do, we don't know how it's going to turn out. All we do, we sit in the system and we generate the data and have it independently verified and say, here you go, here's this, do with it what you will, because we don't really mind what you do with it, because that will add further value, which flows down the chain to our farmers and rural operators and stuff like that. So we wouldn't deal with a farmer that's got 50 hectares or something like that, because it's not viable for us, it's not viable for them. But anybody that's sort of got 500 hectares plus, then they pretty much fall within our framework. But it's emerging. Again, it's still early stages, all this kind of thing goes. It's the ESG stuff is a major shift associated with the net zero process. Really big shift.
It is, and globally, having that being verified and sometimes certified and having those structures that you can see it as a big shift. That greenwashing piece started, and especially when it comes to banks and investment groups, they have been just smashed, for their greenwashing quickly. It's kind of like, people scratch the surface and it was like, that's a mining company, and things like that all over the place. It's like, hold on. So yeah, no, I really appreciate that. And let me open the floor to one more question, but we'll do some there's plenty of room for conversation. So anybody else have a burning question or a comment? Any comment, things that they've seen that they would love to share? Yeah, go ahead, Peter. I just unmute yourself.
Thanks, Ian, for the discussion. I think it's wonderful, and I think it's the future. We've just got to embrace it. I work with a lot of smaller and sort of medium-sized businesses, and they struggle to get sort of genuine purpose and genuine things that they can do to contribute. And I was just wondering whether you had any examples of smaller businesses that are able to atomize this big audacious goal that we've got and bring it down into something that's quite meaningful at a lower level.
Specifically, no, I don't. But again, I think the purpose of what I was trying to intimate in my initial discussion was that understanding the dynamics of what is going on in the broader sense and the impact on our financial statements, on what we have to do, and all this kind of stuff. It's up to the advisors, the accountants, and the business owners to figure out what their message is, what their value proposition is. We know that they are required to go through this process, or will be required to go through this process. We know that stakeholders, and if you're corporate reporting or a public listed company or something like that, your stakeholders are a different set of fit. They're your shareholders, they're your activist groups, they're all sorts of things like that. And you'll have to report to them in a certain way. But if you're an SME delivering a product, a consumer product, for example, then, by and large, your stakeholders are the people that buy off you. So it's like, well, how do I take what good I'm doing and package that up into a message that will resonate with my customers, whether my customers are of my generation or whether they're in their 30s or whether they're in their teens or 20s, obviously different message. So I think that's where the creativity comes in. And again, as I said, there's no one solution. This is a major shift. Everything's shifting around, and nobody knows where all the deck chairs are going to end up. So it's like, well, how do I create the message out of that? How do I work with my brand marketing people or my whoever it's going to be, and what channels do I push them down? Maybe the solution for something is that you have a dancing head on TikTok or whatever it is. I don't know. The only reason I mention that is my son is the partnership channel manager for TikTok in United Kingdom. I have no idea what he does, but they pay him an awful lot of money to do it. But that resonates with that consumer group. So is that a channel? I don't know.
Part of it is also, I think, Peter's great question is that there's a lot of opportunity to partner with those that are really doing it. And I think so, when we look at the small, medium space, enterprises where they can't afford everything or can't afford the large scale fees, sometimes those who are in this really lovely place of being the trusted advisors can also channel a number of opportunities together with the right parties, if that makes sense. So in other words, you go, okay, we've got 5 of these clients, this is what they look like. Here is an organization, say it's a New South Wales one that does this work. Maybe let's package a few of these up and work with them to get the benefit to those. I mean, there are ways, and part of it, I think, if anything to watch out for is right now there's a lot of generation of overhead, because everyone's trying to solve this mismatch of, like it's here, there's all these different standards, and you can trade it here, you can't trade there. So people are trying to build this. And I think that in the coming years, just like what Ian was saying, it's not just the Microsoft, but it's that MRV. There'll be a removal, I think, of the overheads, which now seems to be like the logical choice. But as you look a little bit further ahead, the partners that are going to be the good ones are the ones that are really in that measurement and reporting, removal of the overheads. If anything, that might be a solution too. Look, I'm really mindful of time. What I wanted to do is just a huge thank you to Ian for leading this conversation. I think that, you can just sort of see that there's just so much to think about. There is so much to process. There is a lot of change in this industry. And what I would recommend is that those who are on this group and those that are going to watch the video later, just reach out to Ian, to Rolls, myself, Julie, others who are working in this space. We'll share the questions, we'll have those conversations. This is an area that is growing and of critical importance to the way that we deal with emissions and the success of projects as well. So Ian, thank you so much for leading this. What I wanted to do is I wanted to have this to be a little segue into giving people a chance to think about the kind of projects that we're seeing in the hub and the different members who are working all sorts of different areas. And I was just going to quickly run through some of those to get your brain's thinking, your creativity going. And we're going to do a quick breakout. And when we do the breakout, what I would love for you to do as a group, just think about two of the areas that we've talked about. One is obviously the emissions and measuring emissions and what that means. And two, the reporting, the first, second, third scope reporting and what that might mean in your space. And does that cause issues? Is that a concern? If you feel you want to talk about one or the other, it's fine, because I think actually as soon as you start talking about the scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions reporting, that can just take up a lot of time. So I'll give you guys, just as a team, just some sense of the kind of projects that the members are working on. And then we'll do a breakout, and I'd like you to have a conversation about where does this conversation around the emissions, reporting, and measurement, where does that fit? So just quickly, it's actually, whenever we talk about the kind of projects and what people are doing, as a group and as a community, we feel just so proud. And just at the really high level, just some ideas to consider what people are working on. One is we've got, and there'll be a conversation coming up around, clothes and clothes recycling, material recycling. There's a conversation around the impact of donations and how much of that goes to landfill, how much of that can actually be used, and what happens with those. There's a big push right now around skills and upskilling and jobs, especially when it comes to regional. We've got a number of projects focusing on both Indigenous and local communities, transitioning from carbon economies into higher skills, into the new economies, into the green economies. There's some fantastic projects around energy and the new energy futures, what's needed, waste to energy, long duration storage, all sorts of incredible work is being done in that space. The manufacture of graphene as a future material in many of the technologies that people are talking about. We've heard about carbon sequestration, soil, trees. There are trading platforms. People are working on this, in the community, in the members. There's a lot around manufacture, and Australia as a whole is pushing, for sovereign manufacturing. We're working on projects in rubber. There's incredible projects around solar. Plastics from organics. There'll be some conversations coming up. The generation of hydrogen. And obviously the whole spectrum of recycling, from reuse, repurposing, and recycling, with both municipal waste, MSW rubber, cladding projects, organic waste, and more. So just thinking about all of these sort of projects that the community is working on and the work that you're doing, I think there is real value in those conversations, because they're happening, because people have got just empty pastures, and what do they do with them? And I know that Julie and others, have many conversations around that. Thanks, Mary. That's a really good point. And maybe I would just as a comment, just to wrap up, the one thing that is also really important, and it gets highlighted by the projects that people are involved in, from small to large, is that the benefits of sustainability, the benefits of sequestering carbon, the benefits of those credits that we can use, actually can change a project from being one of maybe break even or it's costing you, but you're doing something just to feel good, to one of extremely financially viable, because the work that we do, and if we demonstrate the change of the soil, the farming practices, the growing of the tree, whatever, or, you know, the diversion from landfill, the credits that get generated can actually make a project extremely viable and extremely successful. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. And so again, thank you everyone for such an amazing conversation. Ian, thanks so much. Really well led. I'd love to just hand over right now to Maurice. We've got a few things that we want to cover off, and we've got one other very exciting project that our members are working on. James McGregor, it's one of his many pet projects. I mean, James has got so much going on. It's incredible. So he'll have a chat about that in just 1 second. So Maurice, did you want to just bring us to what is happening in the world of Symphony 7 and the hub?
Yeah, for sure. I think we're mainly all members now. I think Colleen is the exception and Ian, but you're a special guest speaker. Probably the key update is tying all the pieces together, and during the workshop and last time we shared the slide of the 3 pieces or the 3 parts where we're taking action, which is one really about growing the community and its stakeholders. The other one is raising awareness of what's happening. And I think Ian, thank you for coming in to share well, what you're learning from the front lines, because that is really a great example of what is going on, and that is going to be a huge shift. And the last piece is then around the projects and actually starting to work together. And I think there's probably a lot to be done here, and just to get a bit of a sense in the room from the members here, who feels like, based on what we've gotten in terms of information inside today, there's a lot more conversations to be had, and it might be worth doing a bit more of a deep dive with members alone, looking at, okay, what are the actual practical applications of this? How can I apply this to my business or to my clients? Can I get by a show of hands or a nod or a shake how people are feeling about that?
Definitely get a sense that there's things that would love to keep talking to, and it feels like there's a sense of needing to talk to lots of different people, because it just seems to be, you know, the credits and the reporting that, you know, first, second, and third, you know, emission scope stuff. So.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, I was going to add to that. So the reporting piece, so in our group, yeah, I'm increasingly seeing requests for clients who are wanting to do this reporting. And you know, we don't do that service, but I'm seeing, and then it's coming from SMEs. It's not coming from the big end of town. Yeah, but following on from, I know I'll give an update in a sec on the growth transformation hub around this bench studio concept. I actually think there's an opportunity for Symphony 7 members around creating a portal for that service to direct when we get those inquiries, because yeah, there's an opportunity there. I think that's worth exploring.
It's a broad range of things that are needed as well, isn't it, James? It's not just a single solution. It actually requires different skills and different pieces of information.
Yeah, we need the Symphony 7 version of KPMG, so they don't get the lion's share of all this auditing stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's good, and I think there's a few other conversations happening. What we'll do for next month is make it a members only session and allow us to really get into a bit more working groups, look at some of these different subjects, and work on projects, collaborations, figure out what we can be doing together, and have a bit of a different format instead of this you know, speakers and open conversations, and balance that out. So that is what it'll be coming up next month. I think everyone here is already coming to the October 12th lunch, so I won't go on about that too much, but again, good opportunity to connect with everyone here and actually shake their hand, or, you know, give them a pat on the back and make sure they're real.
Maurice, because there's going to be a number of people who'll see this as a recording, do you want to just talk about that lunch and just quickly what that's about and when?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's October 12th. The lunch is one of our quarterly events where we're bringing together the whole of the community, so the different Symphony 7 pieces. It's where we can, as I said, actually meet the people face to face, engage with them. And what we're doing this time, and I'll speak about this concept of the hot seat a little bit more and pass over to James, is bringing in companies to share 1, 2, or even 3 of the top challenges with the group. And together as a collective, we'll work together and facilitate a working lunch to start addressing and solving those. And the 2 speakers this time, one is Nick Morris, OAM, who is on the board of Spinal Research Institute and will be representing them, but also has a fantastic story himself. I guess, well, fantastic is one way to put it, but inspiring story where I believe at the age of 16 or 17, he was in an accident that resulted in him losing the use of his legs, and went from being sort of a top athlete and having lots of opportunities to having to really look at that and still going on to do great things. I believe he won, as part of this Team Australia, won the gold medal in basketball or Paralympic basketball. And Tim Hall as well from PrimeSolve, who is we're developing a way to democratize financial advice and make it accessible to people who can't afford 3, 4, 5, or 10 grand a year on someone to help them manage their assets. So they're going to be sharing some of their challenges, and as a group we'll look to solve them, support them, open doors, and in the process create a positive impact. And that is the I guess a big focus, or a thing that we're introducing more and more to the community. And last month at the GNT Hub, James took the hot seat in a similar fashion online this time and shared his concept around Venture Builder, but specifically also the renovation planner, which is a concept he's been developing to help people manage larger renovations, make sure they run on time, don't go over budget, but also have better sustainability outcomes. James, would you, it's probably been close to a month now, would be great to hear, I guess, some updates from your end on what's happening. I know in the morning of the 12th, a number of people, some of them here already, will be joining that session as well to continue working on that. But it would be great to get a bit of an update from your end.
Still got to work out the details on that, but yes, we agreed in principle that morning we'll get together. So is the recording from that hub session available to the group here?
We can make it. We have the recording.
It would help because I won't have time to cover it now. But basically the hot seat, and this was an idea. Actually, we talked about this at one of these hub sessions back in March, because I remember I was standing in the rain in Manly at the time, about how do we actually, my new TLA three-letter acronym for the year is GSD, get shit done. And so how do we actually get stuff going as a group? And so basically I pitched the idea to the Growth and Transformation Hub about this idea of a venture studio, and specifically a Symphony 7 venture studio, which is, so one of the things I believe is, if we're going to tackle all these environmental issues, what we need are scalable ventures that focus on a specific problem that fix that at scale, like the stuff Ian's doing, right? So but specialize in a particular problem. And there's a business model called venture studios, which is basically like factories for startups. And so you custom design startups to address particularly market issues. And the idea is, as a collective, effectively get a whole lot of members together who have the right mix of skills, become co-founders of a venture, and they actually put in sweat equity, and we spin out companies that fix problems at scale. And so I pitched that to the Growth and Transformation Hub. We have a specific startup that we were working on with CSIRO that they want to commercialize and spin out. So we put that up as like, here's a project to work on together as a pilot. And it's called My Renovation Plan. If you watch the video, you'll see there's a whole lot of detail on that. Don't have time to cover it now, but the idea is that we get a group of S7 members who become effectively co-founders in that business, and we launch it and scale it and use that as the model to then tackle food waste or textile waste or carbon accounting or whatever it is. And so we are planning to get together before the luncheon on the 12th somewhere. No, I haven't looked at any details yet, but on that morning. So if you're interested, more than welcome to come along, and we'll talk about the mechanics of how that might work and use this particular startup as a bit of a pilot to see how that model might work. So there have been a number of conversations since, which we've been introduced to a couple of different investors around the idea, some crowdfunding type people as well. So there's lots of interest around it, but we'll probably nut out the details on 12th.
James, thanks for that. And from the way I'm hearing you describe it, you're being your usual modest self, because I've seen a lot of the detail now behind it, and my sense is you've already done a lot of the work. This is now a business that's kind of ready to go. Speaking of which, have you on any previous sessions met Christopher Gray or Lucas? Help me get this right this time. Golozny.
So I met Lucas at the last session, I think, when Hamed and I were presenting. And yeah, as soon as he said innovation, I knew he'd get what we were talking about. So, and actually, he might have been at the Bench Studio session as well, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, so yes, we haven't actually met, I don't think, properly, but we should catch up after offline.
So, Chris and Lucas, I suspect that Maurice and I will not be able to attend the circle session because we'll be physically and mentally preparing for the lunch that starts at 12.
Yeah.
But obviously, if you guys would like to join, this is an opportunity. This is the first, how can I call it, internally led venture opportunity where essentially we're together working with James, offering for members of Symphony 7 to become commercially involved in a venture. In this case, the venture is pretty much ready to go. It's not...
Yeah, it's ready to launch. Yeah, there's like 4 years worth of work that's gone into it, and probably $1 million worth of research with the CSIRO to get it ready to go. MVP's built. It's just a matter of let's get it out there in the world.
It's absolutely awesome, absolutely fantastic. From the just around the hot seat, maybe just take a minute. What did you find was great with the hot seat? Because I think that's something that is going to be quite unique in what we do from the community, and as we bring, especially the hubs and the different groups together, when there's a hot seat, it's that the community is getting to be really strong and impactful. So maybe just what was your feeling from the hot seat? Like, what did you get out of it? Did you sweat? Was it a hot seat?
No, I didn't sweat. I don't stress about these things, but so I think that the value for me in that particular one is I was asked questions that I hadn't thought about. All right, so because sometimes when you work on these things, you get a bit of tunnel vision, and you think you got the answers to everything, and then someone goes, "Well, what about this?" I went, "Okay, I never really thought about that from that perspective." So I think just getting like the wisdom of the crowd, like you get, because there's within Symphony 7, there's so many skill sets that individually we all have our own biases, like we see the world through the lens of our knowledge and what we know, and so sometimes you don't see things because you don't know what you don't know. And so what I found about the hot seat was getting asked questions that I'd never thought about, which made me think about and in some cases go, okay, well I can deal with that. The fact now that was even on my radar, I found valuable, and some of that, then some of the follow-up feedback as well. So I think for me that was the most valuable thing. It just gives you a different perspective on what you're trying to achieve, as opposed to where if I need help to do this next step. For me, it was more about what assumptions have I made about this venture that I haven't planned for.
Yep. No, that's really great. And I think that Maurice's idea, especially of the next session for this particular hub being focused on projects that we know are in train. So they're not going to be hot seat style, right, Maurice? They're going to be more focused on, okay, let's get a little bit of information, keep it fairly high level, and see where the interest is, and allow the members to kind of dive in and jump into that and potentially break out more into hot seat if needed. Do you want to talk about that, Maurice, about what your vision is for that?
Yeah, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head there, where it's not let's do a deep dive on one specific person. I'll be talking to everyone before the next session anyway, so we can start identifying where some of that interest is. And as well talking about, whether it's new projects and, whether it's on the clothing waste, as well around food recycling and seeing what can come out of that. And looking at where some of the interests are and where people are working in, and actually jump in and share those projects. What am I going? And as James put it, here's my assumptions. What are some of the questions I need to be thinking about, but do it more collaboratively, where everyone might bring their own problem or their own things, and to work through that together, rather than a one person share and then everyone else support them. So
we'll get the invites out. Yeah, we'll get the invites out to all the members pretty soon. We'll open that up across the different hubs, that real broad access, and we'll put a little list together of some of the projects we're thinking about discussing.
One of the things that came out of today, which knowing Ian that we still have you for 3 minutes, I thought I'd ask what your thoughts are, and it came out of, I guess, the conversations around, okay, the big guys in town, they've got the budgets, they've got all these complex systems, they can essentially leverage economies of scale to help create some of these solutions. But for SMEs and smaller, it is starting to get a lot more difficult, or it's either just doesn't make financial sense to do it yet. And is there potentially a problem somewhere there to help using some form of digital platform, and to make the measurement, reporting, integration of those things a lot easier for small to medium businesses, so there isn't a lot of overheads? Is there potentially an opportunity that will be emerging there in the coming years, where there's an easy access point for small companies who want to measure and report their scope 1, 2, 3s, but also find ways to actually benefit from that?
That's an interesting comment. Just a thought that bubbled in my head just then. What if sustainability, what if Symphony 7 went to some larger corporates, Australian corporates that have sort of social or community brand values? Particularly, an example would be Bunnings, say, for instance, which has got really high community values and stuff like that, and said, how can you support us at Symphony 7, who's comprised mainly of SMEs, who are going to be part of your Scope 3 supply chain, to provide some resources which will assist SMEs to transition to Scope 1 and 2 and blah, 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 which is going to benefit you because, Mr. Big Corporation, you have to report anyway, so it's better if people in your supply chain are that reporting thing. I don't know. I just wonder whether you can appeal to them to help their supply chain transition towards assisting them in the broader context. Maybe that's one way. Maybe S7 can look at that as a strategy. Just try it with some of the corporates. I mean,
that's an extension of, isn't it, of what you were saying as well, James, right? So there are queries coming in, but in everything, like, in every project we would do, there's like, where's the supply and where is the demand, or, what is the input and who's doing the offtake? And I think what you're saying, Ian, is very similar. There's all these queries coming through. That's what you're referring to, right? Maurice, there's all these queries. Then we need to have someone who will support that, or maybe, on the end, who's going to be demanding that of them. So therefore, how does that whole network end to end work, and how can we support them in that? I think we do need to have that big picture. Very much so. Those on that other end who are pushing it down, say, hey, you're our suppliers, we need this reporting. It's coming in a big way, right? I think that's why you're saying as well, James, right? That's why you're seeing so many SMEs. They're going, "Hey, hold on a second,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
and they're
do this reporting."
yeah, they're
Because
all
I'm
going, "Oh, okay, we've got to do this stuff. What do we do? Where do we start? And then what do we focus on?" Like they're all, it's pretty much the same. I'm having exactly the same conversations, and they're not massive companies.
Yeah.
They're probably like second tier, right? So you got your big corporates, like the next, it's the next tier down there. So they're still pretty big enterprises, but they really just don't even know where to start. Like it's a completely foreign language to them in many ways.
And they're the ones that are mostly trying to avoid your Deloittes and KPMGs and things because
exactly they don't want to. Yeah, and so I've been like just farming off the different smaller consultancies I know, but it's increasingly we're getting those inquiries. So putting my venture builder hat on, I always think in those terms is Symphony 7. You got to create the KPMG accounting of ESG, but that could be a S7 spin out as well, where you just basically build that from scratch and you just offer that as a service, and you send them all there, because it's a pretty repeatable process.
That's right. And I just want to I guess at this point, just thank everybody, because I think that is it's a fantastic way to wrap up our session. Every moment that we continue to talk, and as a group, and even here, we've got such a small group here, but of a very large or much larger Symphony 7 cohort, the more we speak, the more we see opportunities. And I love this venture builder approach. And I know, James, you've been talking about this for a long time, like how many times, and it's so good that, it's actually started to get the traction that it needs, because this is the right community to make that work. So I just want to thank everybody for all your effort. Ian, again, thank you so much for your time. And I don't think anybody really realizes just the number of hours that you do in a day, and that to take 2 hours and to talk this through and share your experience we're very lucky. And it was a fantastic conversation. Thank you for leading that. And Jez, I do hope you can get some sleep sometime in the next few years, but you're not expecting it, I know. So thank you so much, and thanks to everybody for your input. We will bring this one to a soft close. If there are any other comments, feel free to bring them up. But thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for all your contribution.
Thanks, Vlad.